Hello everybody and welcome to my channel Airborne for Animals. My name is Lydia and today I'm going to be sharing with you how I take my wildlife photos. If you follow me on Instagram, you may have seen some of my wildlife photography already. Photography is a huge passion of mine and I've been doing it for about 6 years now. Animals are my favourite subject, which is why I'm doing this video with you today so I can share my tips and tricks and all the things that I have learned. If you like this video, be sure to like it, subscribe and click the bell icon so you'll be notified whenever I post. Just a quick disclaimer that I'm not a very techie person, so I might not use the right words or I don't really have the deep understanding as to why these things work the way that they do. I have learned my photography from a lot of trial and error. I studied for a year at college and also my uncle David, shout out to you, has also been a huge part of why I am where I am today with my photography. So let's get into it. First off is the equipment that I use. I'll leave links to everything that I mentioned down below in the description box if you want to check it out. Since I started photography, my go-to camera has been the Canon 60, which is this one here. The newer model of this camera is the Canon 60 Mark II. From what I've read, these cameras are really good for entry-level photographers, but I've been using this for 6 years and it's never let me down. I have also tried a couple of mirrorless cameras, such as the Canon PowerShot, but unfortunately I was really underwhelmed by the quality of the photos. Currently I'm using the Canon N50 as my vlogging camera, but also I want to try it out and use it for my wildlife photography as well. Lens-wise, it depends what you want to photograph. For pet photography, for instance, a 50mm lens would be really good, whereas if you want to go on an African safari, for example, you'd probably need a 200mm lens at least. My absolute favourite lens is this one. It is the Canon EF Ultra 70 to 200mm lens. That's probably not the exact name, but that's what it says on the side, so I'm going to go with that. This is a telephoto zoom lens. This is good for distances of about 7 to 8 meters. I have looked and different blog posts tell you different kinds of lengths, but for me, that's what I have found while using this lens. I took this with me on safari to South Africa and I got some incredible shots, although I do sometimes wonder if I would have got better shots if I took a 300mm lens. However, the 200mm is already quite heavy. If you want to take photos in a zoo, for example, then the 50mm lens is going to be good for you. This is the one that I use at the moment. And it's good for zoos because you will be carrying it around for probably a few hours. And usually you can get a lot closer to the animals than you can if you're on safari. Although there have been a few instances where I do just wish I had my 200mm lens. If you have a lens that you love but it doesn't fit your camera, then you can also get one of these adapters. This is one of my absolute most favourite things because I always dread finding new lenses when I want to get a new camera. But with this, as long as you get the right size, you can clip any lens to any camera. So those are all of the bits and pieces that I use to take with me when I go do my wildlife photography. I have so much other photography and vlogging equipment, so I can do a separate video on that if you'd be interested. But this video is just on wildlife photography. So now we're going to get into the settings that I use. One thing I should say is that I never figured out the ISO setting on the camera. I have played around with it and I've done some reading about it and watched some videos about it and I just can't figure it out. So I do cheat and have this setting on automatic and let the camera just do its thing. And that hasn't failed me so far. Another setting is shutter speed. This will vary depending on if your animal is moving or not. If your animal is sleeping or being very, very lazy, then I think a shutter speed of about 1/200 will be just fine. However, if your animal is on the move, then I would say 1/500 is probably best. However, there's no harm in having it super fast, like 1/1250, because then you're sure to capture every single detail of the movement that the animal is doing. Lastly, you need to consider the aperture. An aperture will vary depending on the lens. So aperture is how much light the camera lets in. So if you'll have a really fast shutter speed, you'll want a really, really low aperture, because the lower the aperture, the more light gets in. If possible, try and keep your aperture on an f2.4, but if you can't do that, then an f5.6 would also be really good. So after attaching my lens to my camera and adjusting all of my settings to how I like them, my setup is now complete, and it's time to take the photos. One really important thing that you need to remember when taking wildlife photography is that patience is everything. It will take you a while to get the perfect shot, but it does pan out eventually. And sometimes I've got shots which I didn't even think I would be able to get just because I sat there and waited. There are so many photography rules, it's ridiculous. But the one which is the most important, and I cannot stress this enough, is to get on the animal's level. This can be pretty difficult when you're on safari and in a vehicle. You can't just get down on the floor whenever there's a lion. But you do need to adjust your body position so you are as low as you can go inside of the vehicle. As you can see in these two photos, the left one is taken above the animal's level, whereas the one on the right is on the same horizontal level. And the right one looks so much more professional in the end. The next tip is to focus on the eyes. No matter how close up you want your photo to be it just a headshot or a full body shot, always focus on the eyes. Sharp eyes make for a really, really good shot. This is more of an editing point, but it is good to think about when you're actually taking the photo, is the rule of thirds. Does the animal or the body part that you're taking a photo of take up 2/3 of the photo? But don't worry, I'll come back to this a little bit later and show you what I mean. So I don't think this is the best tip, at least I really regret it when it comes down to actually editing the photos, but keep your finger on the button. Always take photos, take as many photos as you can. My logic behind this is the more photos I take, the more are going to be in focus and the more I'll have to work with. The last important rule is the rule of lines. I don't know if that's actually what it's called, but that's just what I call it. This is probably leaning more towards landscape photography than it is wildlife photography, but I have found it useful. With this photo of the zebras, you can see that the road leads up and meets directly in the middle where the zebra's head is. Naturally, when you look at a photo, your eyes follow the lines. So try and incorporate these if you can. Okay, now let me tell you about my editing process. Photoshop is a common editing software for photography, but I do prefer Lightroom. I usually go through all of the photos that I have taken in Lightroom and use the star rating that they have available so I know which ones I want to edit first. I'm going to edit a photo while I'm talking so you guys can see the process behind what I do. I'm starting with this photo of a polar bear that I took in Rotterdam Zoo. First off, I start cropping by adjusting the lines so they are straight because we don't want the viewer's eyes to go to the wrong place. I then start editing the crop so the polar bear takes up 2/3 of the photo. Now in this instance, the animal doesn't take up the whole of the two sections, but it does cross the line, as you can see here in this wolf photo. So after a little adjusting, I decide to take off the crop and make the photo black and white. Now, my reasoning for this is to give the image a kind of theme or like a vibe. I have mixed feelings about animals in zoos, but I really, really hate polar bears in zoos. There's a whole multitude of reasons, but I just dislike polar bears in zoos, and I wanted to portray that dislike through this photo. I also really love the use of shrubbery in the corner, which make the other third of the photo not look so empty. And then I use a brush to go around the edges as a sort of vignette. My brush is always on the lowest exposure so I can easily see where I put it, and then I adjust it afterwards. I could do more edits on this photo, but just for show and tell, I'm just going to leave it there. And now you can see the difference for before photo and after photo. And these are all the wildlife photography tips that I have for you today. If you've got any questions, just leave them in the comment box below and I'll be happy to go through and answer all of them. Just remember to be patient and you'll learn most things over time. Everything that I have learned has been mostly through trial and error. So best of luck with your photography, and I'll see you next time. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like, subscribe and click the bell icon so you'll be notified whenever I post, which is on Wednesdays and Saturdays. See you next time!